The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're really pleased to have two members of the House of Delegates with us this morning. Delegate Chris Collins. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Delegate Dave LaRock, good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Woody.
Let's start with your colleague because he is a newly elected member to the House of Delegates. Tell us how the transition has been because you were formerly a member of the Frederick County Board of Supervisors.
Exactly, from local government to state government. It has been an interesting transition. Obviously, from local government, you're dealing with much more local issues. You're dealing with a neighborhood issue rather than a statewide issue. And that's one of the big transitions I've had to deal with is looking at bills. I'm looking at it, how's it going to affect not only my locality, but how's it going to affect Norfolk or Richmond, for that matter. So that has been an interesting, that's been a gear shift that I've had to work through. But I'm getting there, and I have a lot of mentors like Dave here who are helping me along the way.
And what about your committee assignments? What committees have you been assigned
I'm on
to?
two committees, Courts of Justice, which I've replaced Delegate LaRock on, and County, Cities, and Towns, which are obviously with my local government background, they thought that would do well there. And I'm a criminal defense attorney and former police officer, so on Courts of Justice, obviously on the criminal subcommittee, they felt that I had some knowledge that would come in handy there.
Tell us a little bit about your district and the constituency you represent.
Sure. Frederick County is it's the most northern county in Virginia, and also the city of Winchester, Warren County, and a little bit of Front Royal. Agriculture is one of our #1 industries in the area. It's mostly rural, very mountainous, and we have one of the better liberal arts universities, private Shedwell University. Both my parents were deans there, created the Conservatory of Music there. And but mostly a agricultural community. We do have some manufacturing there, and then we have a lot of people who commute to D.C. every day via Route 7 and Route 50. So they come out there to live for the low taxes and the beautiful scenery.
And Delegate LaRock, you have Loudoun County and parts of other localities. Talk to us about your constituency.
Sure. Well, very diverse as well. It is a predominantly rural district. A lot of people there, as with the district Chris serves, commute into Washington or into the Dulles corridor. So, kind of a mix of some families who have been in the area for literally centuries, some who have been there quite a bit less than that. But we all call it home and enjoy living there.
So you've got a lot of people who commute. I know you're on transportation. What other committees are you assigned to? Yeah,
science and technology. And this year I've started out, switched from courts to make room for a couple of the new lawyers. And I've been working on education now, assigned to that committee.
So tell us, how did the recession and especially sequestration affect the district you represent?
Well, good question, Woody. I haven't done a lot of analysis of that, but certainly it affects businesses whose employees live in that area. And so adjustments in income directly affect local tax revenue, and so it requires that the local governments tighten their belts and gets us all looking for ways to supplement what previously had been flowing into the economy from the federal government.
Who are some of the major employers, the private employers in your district?
Well, again, Loudoun, the district I serve is
Yes.
west of Leesburg, and so not a lot of concentrated, big entities in that district, but a lot of the employees that work in those. So nearby there is Telos, Verizon has a huge facility, and Yeah, so moving out toward Winchester, we have a craft foods facility. That's a pretty big business, but wineries are also part of our rural economy and a very growing segment of Virginia economy overall. And that's actually expanding over to include distilleries, breweries, cider manufacturing.
Do you have any military installations in your district?
Do not.
But I take it you have a lot of federal government employees who live in the district.
I think so, yeah.
So everyone's talking about the need to move away from the dependency upon the federal government. And how do we do that? Obviously, we need to attract new private businesses, young entrepreneurs into your district and the Commonwealth. How do we do that?
Well, I think anytime you want to attract business, you have to make it attractive to the people who need to be the employees of that business. So that means a tax base that's not prohibitive of the cost of living and level of service that is in line with their expectations. Good education is certainly very, very crucial for families with kids who will be entering the school system, either private or public. So you got to make it attractive for employees, and you have to make sure that the regulatory atmosphere and tax atmosphere allow them to be profitable and thrive in that area.
There's a long-standing business in your community that recently announced they were going to expand. I think it's Shawnee Candy Company. Tell us the history of that company, why that announcement was so important.
Well, that company's been around for quite some time. It's a family-owned business. I actually worked for them as a kid in the summertime because I lived near there in Cross Junction. They have grown their operation to have a market selling their canned goods out to the public. But the Whitaker family, who owns that business, they're orchardists, and so they have a plethora of peach and apple orchards, and so they have their own canning facility. But it's grown, and they buy apples and peaches from other localities and can them there. And their product is well sought after. But it's a small company. They don't have much of a distribution chain. So most of it's word of mouth, or we have people driving in hundreds of miles to come get a case of whatever canned items, and they'll let people know when they've had a fresh canning, so that people know they can come in and they just had a whole bunch of peaches be canned, for example. So it's exciting to see a small business like that growing and continue to be around. A small family-owned business, you don't see that a lot much anymore. Big corporations are walking in and trying to take it over. So I think that it's very exciting for my community that we continue to invest in this little business, mom and pop shops.
I noticed you have some legislation dealing with drug treatment courts. Talk to us about why there is a particular need for that now.
Well, the heroin epidemic is growing. We're gaining ground on it, but it's a tremendous issue. We've had multiple heroin deaths in our community and multiple heroin overdoses in our community. Heroin is easy to get a hold of because you can drive to Baltimore and get it. So a 2-hour drive, and you can get as much heroin as you want and bring it back to our locality. It's inexpensive, but heroin is the product runs the gambit. So that's the reason that you have some people that's a little bit weaker, a little bit stronger, and that's the reason we have so much issues. The problem is that we don't have. If we treat the addicts as criminals, then we're not really solving the problem. The idea here with drug courts is for the drug addict, and we're talking about just people who are charged with drug charges, not other charges. Being able to get them the treatment and things like that. With drug courts, it's usually a local funded mandate, locally funded. For example, Valley Health, who's our number one health provider in our region, has already supplied some money and some support when we are able to create it. So it's more of a community-based action program. But the criminal justice system is still there for people who are unwilling to take advantage of what we're giving them. So that's the purpose behind that, trying to address the addiction problem, the demand issue, the demand side of the economics of drugs.
So where does that legislation lie right now? Where is it?
Well, there's two things. I have a bill pending in front of courts of justice, but I also have a budget language amendment. It doesn't ask for any money from the budget. It's just a matter of adding to the budget language. Governor McDonald, several years ago, they added that language to create drug courts. There's some question whether or not you need to have enabling language for each and every jurisdiction. And so I'm just clarifying that through what I'm asking for.
Great, great. And Delegate LaRock, you've been a leader in a number of educational issues, especially school choice. Talk to us about that issue and how important it is.
Well, very timely question, Woody. You will probably understand that this is School Choice Week. And the essence of school choice is that by expanding the access to options, you better serve the market. So in this case, I have presented a bill for this to be the second year. The first year we had a good run and actually made it to a tie vote in the Senate, which was broken by Lieutenant Governor Northam. So we've expanded the eligibility bracket, so it's a more aggressive bill, but it's what people want. Many people want. Polls very well, always glad to know that, but really we want to draw parents into the process of educating their children. They're excellent value seekers when you enable them to do that. So I think of an education savings account as a vehicle. It's not it's a tool in the toolbox to allow parents to, again, be the decision makers to help shape the curriculum. I have some background in that as homeschooling family. We've seen how well that can work when you take into consideration the uniqueness of every child. And then not to say that schools, public schools don't do that, but it's an enormous challenge. So again, by taking it down to this level, we think that we're adding another great option for people in Virginia who would choose to do that route. So it's one thing to allow them to do that we do that now, but we want to also put a little bit of the funding in a bank account that they control that allows them to explore those educational options like virtual schools, private schools, and many others, tutoring.
And of course, there's another important element that's still being debated, and that is the need for more charter schools and moving that decision-making process from, I believe, local school districts to the State Board of Education. As I understand it, what we have between 6 and 9 charter schools throughout the Commonwealth, and compared to other states, that's a paltry amount.
I would agree. Yeah, that's a tough question. I am a strong advocate for local control, and it kind of pits that question against the need and the access to these charter schools. Local schools really just have not taken the initiative to form these schools and local school districts, which is where the authority lies now. And I think because we need to have this as an option to the general public, that the state needs to take a leadership role in authorizing the formation of these schools. School
choice, options, and also competition when you have charter schools. Are those some of the things you heard during your campaign?
Absolutely. I'm a product of public schools, and both my parents are educators. My wife's an educator, so I believe in education very strongly. But we do need to have options. There's families out there that would like to have additional options, and I think charter schools is a good way of doing that. I also share same concerns that we're creating a centralized agency to create these charter schools rather than have localities do it. And the debate there, obviously, well, localities probably won't do that. So if we want charter schools, we're going to have another agency do that. But it is something that I did polling as well. I did a survey before coming down here, and that survey was overwhelmingly they wanted charter schools. So at least I think when we share the same district to a certain degree, we're neighbors, and I think his numbers and my numbers are going to be about the same throughout our region.
I noticed you also have some legislation dealing with assault and battery by certain students. What's that all about?
Well, this is actually a bill that Delegate LaRock brought to me, and we worked on it. We're working on it together. Basically, there are children who have individual educational plans that have intellectual deficiencies, autism, mental retardation. We have carved out a special exemption for teachers. That if you are a teacher and you're assaulted, that could potentially be a felony. Where it's just a simple where a student pushes a teacher, it could potentially be a felony. What we've done is we're carving that out and saying, well, if you've got an individual educational plan or an IEP, and you have an intellectual disability, you can only be charged with a misdemeanor and not a felony. And we had a situation in our locality where he and I worked together with the constituent where their child, autistic child, pushed a teacher out of the way because she was having issues and needed to get out of the classroom. So we wanted to make sure that we alleviate that need. Now, she was not charged with a felony. We had a very understanding prosecutor and very understanding sheriff. But what we want to make sure that doesn't happen in the future.
A lot of things going on in our school systems, but school buses and cameras, there's something about that you're dealing with.
Yeah. If I may just close the
Please.
school choice by saying that I was thrilled to be able to bring a letter from the Friedman Foundation, and they basically own a big piece of the turf in school choice. The late Milton Friedman, 50 years ago, conceptualized the voucher. Our program is not a voucher, but into the hearing we brought a former Secretary of Education, Gerard Robinson. He spoke forcefully in favor of school choice, including the form we were introducing. And I had a letter with me with 5 school board members, some from Loudoun, Fairfax, which is the largest school district in Virginia, and speaking in favor of the bill. A former Attorney General Cuccinelli and several other advocacy group leaders. So was thrilled to show that level of support. My own school board vice principal was very disappointed that we couldn't guarantee her a slot at the mic, because she was willing to make a 5-hour round trip just for a couple minutes at the mic. So I was thrilled to be able to introduce that. But to move into the
School buses.
Yeah, last year, very recently, I'll say Jackson Miller, Delegate Miller, did a real heavy lift in passing a bill that would allow school buses to have cameras that take a picture of a car that is passing them when they have their red lights on. So that's obviously a public safety issue. We want to do whatever we can to protect kids who are in that potentially dangerous situation. What the bill didn't do explicitly, in an Attorney General's opinion, pointed out that without explicit permission, summonses that were generated as a result of the pictures that are taken by those cameras could not be mailed. So that made it very impractical for every one of those summonses to have to be hand-delivered by a law enforcement officer. So this bill would just add to that the permission to mail the summonses. I didn't see that as being a big issue, but there's an awful lot of interest in part of the general public and the people who provide the cameras and the school districts to see this go through. So we're hoping that that's exactly what will happen and that'll be put in motion.
Sounds like an interesting issue, especially from a legal perspective, the legality, if you will, of mailing of summonses. How does that work?
Well, we have allowed that in the past for other things. You have red light camera tickets and things like that. This is a little bit different because it's a traffic ticket, and it could be considered a reckless driving ticket, a Class 1 misdemeanor. So there's some massaging that out, because whether or not we have to prove that it was the individual driving or whether or not it's a car. But I agree with Delegate LaRock. This is an issue. And I think anybody who drives behind a school bus sees people passing school bus all the time. You can go on YouTube and watch a multitude of videos. My best friend is the traffic supervisor for the Frederick County Sheriff's Office, and he's a big advocate of this. This is what they do the first of the school year, every year, for a couple of weeks, and they write numerous tickets. And but this is something that an extra protection to make people really understand that when those buses have those lights on, you need to stop.
Even though this is your first year, I'm sure you're intimately aware of the issues surrounding the standards of learning. And there have been a multitude of reforms over the past couple of years. There are more reforms coming. Is that something you're still hearing about from your parents, teachers, and even students?
Exactly. Well, my son has an IEP.
Okay.
And so he's in 3rd grade. He's getting ready to take the SOLs. And what I hear from a lot of teachers is they need exemptions for the SOLs for special needs students. We had a situation for 6th grade students. There was a special education 6th grade class, but they're required to take the SOLs at the 6th grade level. None of them had, their math level was at a 4th grade level, their reading level was at a 2nd or 3rd grade level. And so I'm talking to these teachers, and they're going, why are we putting our kids through this kind of stress when there's absolutely no way they're going to succeed on these tests, because they're just not intellectually able to, they're not at that level yet. And so that's one item. We test way too often. I think we're always trying to gauge where our students are, but if you look at nations that have the best educational systems, they don't have nearly the testing requirements that we have, and their students are turning out far better than ours when they actually take a standardized test. So I think that we need to look at this again, of course, some of this comes from the federal government. Once again, we have a catchphrase, educational plan, no child left behind, or whatever other catchphrase looks good on a commercial. And thankfully, they're pulling some of that back, and I'm hoping the feds are hearing from us, from the localities, and from state government saying, this is not working. It's causing more problems than it's creating.
And Delegate LaRock, I know you've been a leader on that issue as well. Talk to us about your concerns.
Well, if I may, can I shift to a very related issue?
Absolutely.
Woody? Yeah, thanks for that. Along the similar lines, that is that we want our kids to go to schools to get a good education, but the more responsibilities that we pile on teachers and principals, the harder it is for them to do that fundamental job of educating. So we have a bill in this year that comes from the awakening that Virginia schools report more potential crimes to law enforcement than any other state in Virginia. Not necessarily a good distinction to have. Right now, I think there are about 40 offenses that a principal is required by law to report to law enforcement. That's a big list to remember, much less to actually handle. So this is a bill that was brought to us by people who are advocating in the direction of avoiding getting kids started off by connecting them with the criminal justice system at an early age. So it proposes to make it a discretionary decision on the part of a principal whether or not to report anything less than a felony. And when you look at the thresholds for some of these crimes, Chris could probably define them for us, but for example, felony assault could be threatening an officer, a school resource officer, a teacher, or a principal, brushing past them. It's potentially felony assault. That would be reportable. But anything less than that, which even minor disruptions such as chit-chatting in class, if a school teacher deems that to be disruptive, that's potentially a disorderly conduct. So we burdened principals with the requirement that too many things be reported. We want them to have the freedom to report them to parents, which they do, but not necessarily all these sort of behavioral things should not encumber them with reporting them to law enforcement.
So keeping those kinds of issues within the confines of the school and the school district, as opposed to taking them to the criminal court, be it juvenile or adult.
Yeah, and again, it wouldn't necessarily put them in court having to report them, but it adds burdens to the law enforcement people then that have to process that, and to the school. So there's an economic side to it, but also we don't want to have these kids have their academic record reflect just minor behavioral things when it doesn's have to be that way. So, and we don't want that number one distinction.
Of course not.
Let me give an example just so we all know. We're all old enough that we all went to high school and fights happened in high school. Yes. Back when we were in school, you took care of it in the school. Principal might have been suspension, detention, parents were involved. Today, they have to call the police, and the police have to do an assault and battery investigation. And so a student may be charged with assault and battery because they got into a kerfluffle in the hallway over who's dating who or something along those lines, and it's just a simple push shove. It's something that we saw every day in high school. Now we're involved in the criminal justice system, and I think that is not. The schools are now passing the responsibilities on to the court system because that's what they're required to do. And I think that the schools would like to have that in-house again and be able to deal with it. If it's serious enough, they still have that option to call the sheriff's department or the police department. But if it's just a simple 2 16-year-olds fighting over, something innocuous, like we saw in high school when we were all there, I think that they can handle that in-house.
It boils down to zero tolerance or discretion of principals and people at the schools. Yeah.
Absolutely. One more question on schools. It has to do with one of the budget matters that the governor has raised, and that's in the second year of his budget. I think he wants to give raises to all state employees, but also school teachers. Now, does that not place an additional burden on local school districts? Because isn't there a match requirement for that?
We had to deal with that in Frederick County a few years ago, where if you wanted to take advantage of the pay raise from the state budget, the locality also had to give a pay raise. Right. The locality didn't give a pay raise. There was no pay raise for the teachers, and that was kind of an unfair, unfunded mandate where the localities were then we were able to work through it in Frederick County, and we worked with the school board and we worked with the Teachers Association, and we got it done. And we actually gave them a little bit. We did a little bit better than what we had to. But if this is one of those unfunded mandate kind of things that we rail against. I'm putting my local government hat back on.
Right.
Unfunded mandates are something where we're trying to figure out what our budget's going to be without having to try to figure out what the state's going to require us to do. If we're going to give a pay raise to teachers, which I have no objection to, we need to come from. It needs to be done. If not to say you localities need to give a pay raise to the teachers. That's not the way it should happen.
Transportation. I'm sure that's not a big issue for either one of you, but I know there's this controversy about I-66 tolling inside the Beltway. Talk to us about that.
Well, if this wasn't such a great opportunity for me, Woody, I'd be upstairs in the hearing right now. This is a series of transportation bills that are going to be heard. But the simplest one, HB 1, very easy number to remember. Delegate Lemunion was right there at midnight pressing the button to submit that bill saying no tolls between mile marker this and that, and because that is a direct outcome of the whole controversy that arose just before the election. The governor announced a plan that in nature maybe not have been so controversial, but the scope of it to impose people commuting from the district I serve on the Dulles Greenway, the Dulles Toll Road are already paying roughly $17 a day round trip. That's about $4,200 a year. The governor's proposal would double that. People coming all the way from Winchester, which I didn't realize how many people commute in on Route 66. They were furious about that. Even if they didn't drive the road, they realized you cannot tell somebody it's going to cost them $4,000 more per year to drive back and forth to work. So I think that I've heard from an interview on one of the radio channels that the governor has pretty much conceded that he may have to allow that bill to pass, which would prohibit tolling on that section of I-66. Unfortunately, it sounds like he's getting ready to poke a stick in the eye of people who brought that forward, but we'll hope he won't keep those promises. But it is very important that we improve that roadway, and there are a variety of things that can be done to do that. Probably a little bit have to go into the weeds to explain them, but adding new lane capacity is critical, and it's absolutely necessary. And the funding of those tolls, the proposed plan that the governor put forward, did not address that. So it would have, I sit on the NVTC, which would have been the governing body, or is the governing body. I voted against taking on that responsibility, would be appropriating those toll revenues to things like bike paths and walking trails. And that just didn't seem like a good idea.
Great. We're going to have to leave it at that. Thanks for being with us today, Delegate Chris Collins, Delegate Dave LaRock.
Thank you, Woody.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.